So if it's too noisy, just let me know, okay?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday, about 4 or 5 days before Christmas, and it's our last live stream of the year. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm joined, as always, today by Jaime, who is here on voice.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our last Q&A of the year.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas to everyone. I was having a nice chat with Amit, actually, so...
Yeah, I see there's already quite a lot of chat on the
Yep.
in the chat room. I haven't really caught up with any. Is any of it worth mentioning on air?
Well, it's people asking for features and plans for 2023.
Okay.
Amit was demanding some more basic ray clone tutorials, which, by the way, we are aware of that. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to find an easy way to explain the software. Because as I mentioned on the chat, once you discover ray clone, it's something that it's don't want to leave never again in your life. So, yeah, we have plans for new tutorials during this year. So
yeah, we'll always bring out more. It's always interesting, difficult to get a balance between new users and experienced users, but we try and keep everyone happy. The idea really generally is that these live streams become the more advanced rail clone stuff, and the basic stuff is the pre-recorded stuff. So that's the kind of way we're thinking of it at the moment.
Yeah. In addition to that, during 2022, we did, I think, almost 30 tutorials, which is quite a lot of content. On top of that, news and blog posts.
And the live streams, of course.
Yeah, and the live streams. So, yeah.
So I've got, as always, I've got a collection of about 9, I think, cases, questions have been asked, either more recently or in the past, about Railclone and Forest Pack. I've tried to give them a little bit of a seasonal flavour, so the examples are a little bit more Christmassy than perhaps they would be normally. So I hope that is in keeping with the season. And I was going to start actually with the tutorial we just released, which is the Christmas lights tutorial. So I'm not going to go over that again, obviously that's all been pre-recorded. But what I did want to mention was at the end there's a little bit with animation where the lights turn on. And did get asked how I did that, because that's not in the tutorial. In the tutorial, it just showed you how to randomise the lights. So I was going to quickly go over that little process and talk about how you can do that. As always, ask questions in the chat. We can interact with you here live. That's one of the nice things about being live. So if you've got any questions, let us know. If you've got any suggestions, let us know. Jaime can reply to those. And if there's anything interesting, we can discuss it between us on air as well. Great. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to switch to 3ds Max, and I'm just going to go into this scene. What I have done, if you've seen the tutorial, you know I used a little glass bulb with a light inside it, and I was tinting the colour of the glass. Now, just because I don't want to get into rendering live, what I've done here is just substituted that for 2 boxes, okay? So you can just see the colours there a little bit more clearly, and if you get in close, you can see I've just got coloured boxes instead. So that's just going to make it a little bit easier to see this animation effect. And what you would need to do in order to do this animation effect is you'd need to duplicate this bulb over to one side, and the light that's inside it, just turn it off. Don't delete it, because the different number of objects in a group will cause it to reseed. So just turn the light off. And then you'll have a bulb with the light on and a bulb with the light off. And that's what I'm simulating with this green bulb and this black bulb here. So, without further ado, let's show you how you'd animate turning these on. I'm going to also see this just mention in advance that 3ds Max has been crashing a lot for me today for some unknown reason. Nothing to do with our plugins, I promise you. So I can't promise that Max will stay open all the way through this. I might have to restart it a few times. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, so this was the end of the tutorial that we did on YouTube the other day. I have added a selector operator to it. That's the only addition there. So I've got a selector operator, and I've got in input 1, I've got the lights on, and in input 2, I've got the lights turned off. And obviously with the selector, you can toggle between those by changing the index. Right, and so what I've got is exported the index, and that means I'm going to be able to control it with an expression. So this isn't not normally something I do in a beginner's Railclone tutorial, but as I say, live streams tend to be slightly more advanced. So we're going to control it with an expression, so I'll take an arithmetic operator here, and I'm going to wire that to the index input, and I'm going to change it to expression. I'm also going to add a numeric node to that, so that's going to give me an output down here in the parameters rollout. See, I've got an output there, and we'll call this animation. And I'm going to set it to float. And set the limit from 0 to 1. So the idea would be that I'm basically going to turn these lights on starting from the start of the spline up to the end, and the idea is that when you set this value to 0, the lights would all be off, and as you gradually animate it increasing to 1, the lights would gradually turn on. That's the aim. So we can do that, and what I'll do is come down here, turn on auto key, go to frame 100 or so, and set the value to 1. So I've got an animation there. I've got an animated camera as well. Let me just switch to perspective mode so that doesn't affect things. Okay, so I've got an animated value there going from 0 to 1. Now what can I do with that? Well, what I can do is I can check the bulb's position on the X spline and see whether it is greater or less than this value, and in doing that I'll be able to gradually turn these things on. So this is how you do it. As always, we want return because that will output a value. And then we need to find the position on the spline. Okay, so there is in here, if you look, a list of variables, and X spline position is the one you're asking for. And if you look at this, it says a normalized position over the X spline from 0 to 1.0. So that means that a segment that's at the start of the spline will have a value of 0, and one that's got the end of the spline will have a value of 1. So using that, we can tell whereabouts on the spline that particular light is. So we can use a conditional statement to check for that. So we can say if, open brackets, I'm not going to type that in, I'm going to double click on it, X spline position is greater than the input, which is animating, if you remember, from 0 to 1, then return 2, else return 1. So basically, if it's greater than the value, return 2, which goes to the selector and picks the bulb that's turned off. Otherwise, turn the bulb on. And now, if I animate, you can see my lights are gradually turning on. And really, it's as easy as that. Okay, so it's just that single line of expression there, that single expression, this animated value here, that can do that. So I hope that answers that question, whoever asked it. And the other thing I might do, I'm just going to put this on a simpler spline for this. There's a couple of other things we could do to animate these. So let's forget this selector for a minute and just go straight into this material node instead. Because something else you might want to do is to make these kind of change color, sparkle in some way. Okay, so we can do that too. So what we could do is in the material node, which is currently randomizing between materials 2 and 6, we can export the from and the to parameters, take a couple of random number nodes, integer from 2 to 6, wire that from, change the segment, and do another one, do the same thing from 2 to 6 segment. Okay, so nothing's going to happen at the moment because there's nothing being animated, but if you look at this random node, it's got a seed value, and of course when you change the seed you get different results. So if we export those seeds from both of these nodes, and add a numeric node and wire that in, then leave on integer, then we can animate this seed value and we'll get glittering lights. So if we were to animate this seed value here, you can see the lights are changing. So that's how you can do that. So yeah, so there's a couple of techniques for animating the lights there, just using sort of pretty basic stuff, the expression probably being the trickiest thing there. Great. Yes, Jaime has shared that tutorial there. So that's, if you're really new to Railclone, that tutorial will just show you how to distribute lights along a spline, and it works with Railclone Light too. So if you're not currently a Railclone Pro user, you can still try this technique out. Any other questions there, Jaime?
Yeah, we have a question from Asad Habib.
Can you
talk about the arithmetic operator and Railclone?
How we can use it and what they do, just fast definitions. That's tricky to do in such a short amount of time. Let me have a quick look. Because there are so many options in the arithmetic operator. But basically, the arithmetic operator, obviously you can do basic things like add, subtract, multiply, divide, max and min. So you can do basic mathematical functions, in which case you don't need to write anything. If you're in those, if you're using these, then you just use, you just wire in numbers. So I could just wire in sort of, I could wire 2 plus 2 into that and get 4, that kind of thing. But when you want to get into the deeper stuff, that's when you switch to expressions. And what expressions gives you access to are values or attributes, as we call them, that simply aren't available anywhere else in a node. And so things like you just saw, like the ability to output a value of 0 to 1 based on the position of the light along the spline, is one thing that's only available in the expressions editor. And there's a ton of these. I mean, I can't really go through them all because we'd be here for the rest of the hour. But there are things like which we'll see maybe a bit later. There's actually, like, you can return the length of the spline, for example, and then you can do various things like that. So you could, you could create your own kind of versions of adaptive mode as you might see fit. You can return the number of the sections in here. So if you divide this spline up into sections, you can get the number so you know which section you're in. That could be really helpful for stairs and things like that. You can get the type of spline, whether it's a curve or a line. You can get the material ID and various other things. And you can also, and you need to use expressions really when you're using marker data, which I'm going to come to actually in the next example. So let's jump over to that example because that's another excuse to look at some of these expressions. So I'll perhaps go over those in a tutorial in a later date and just do like I think at one point I did all the nodes explained in 10 minutes or something like that. So maybe I can do something similar for all the expressions. Yeah. So the next one, keeping it Christmassy, we have been asked a bit like the last question, but to do with marker data, like just the basics of how you use marker data in a graph. And I think that question comes up because it's not obvious, because a lot of the time you do need to access an expression to get to it. And so it's not really a very real world example. You're probably not going to want to control a load of candy canes with marker data. But as it's Christmas, that's the example we're going to use. So I'm just loading the file up here. Okay. So a little bit of work's already done. I've got my Railclone object here, and what I've got is a simple generator here, which has got a start, a middle, and a default section, and I can control the length of my candy cane using the X size input. Okay, so that's what I've got. So what I'm going to use, I'm just going to use that, to demonstrate how you can control things like that length and the rotation and so forth using marker data on another spline. So I want to put that on various markers on this spline down here. So first things first, because this is a whole generator with a start, middle and end, I can't kind of assign that to the marker directly. I need to nest that inside another generator. So I'll just add another linear generator, and I'm going to wire this one to the marker input. Okay, so it will disappear. And then I'm going to add a spline node, and I'm going to pick this spline from the scene and wire that to the spline input, like so. Now, still nothing's going to appear because I've got no markers on there. So I'll go to the spline object itself now, and I'm going to add a rail clone spline modifier. Rail clone spline, there it is. And add a couple of markers. So there's one, and there's one. Okay, good. Now let's come back to the rail clone object and fix a few things. So first of all, obviously when I created this rail clone object, I created it along the x-axis as you would normally. So the first thing you need to do is rotate that if you want it to be vertical. So I'll do that by adding a transform node here, and I'm going to override the alignment and change the y-axis to pivot just to align it to the spline using its original pivots. And then I'm going to go into the transform tab and try -90 for the rotation to stand that up. So there we go. We've got our candy canes now on each one of those markers. So let's say hypothetically, let's look at the easiest way to use marker data, which is to use the IDs, because you don't really need to use an expression for that. So in this case, let's say we wanted to use the the marker ID to choose whether the candy cane has the handle up or down. So I'm going to create two states for this. I'm going to duplicate this transform node, and I'm going to just change the rotation from -90 to just 90. And then take a selector operator and wire those two different states through that. Now in the selector operator, in the selector drop down, you've actually got an option to change based on the X-spline marker ID. Okay, so that is one of the options in the marker modifier, and it's just a simple index value. So if we turn that on, what I should be able to do now is come back to this spline, and coming down here, it's under user data, the first thing here is the ID. Now if I change that between 1 and 2, you can see that candy cane on the end is turning upside down. If I pick the third marker and do the same thing, I've turned that one upside down too. So you can see I can choose different geometry using marker ID, and that's probably where that's the most useful. So what we've got underneath this though is data. Okay, so what you can do with data is you can control various attributes of the graph beyond just switching between geometry. So I could, for example, use it to set the rotation of the candy cane. I could use it to set the sort of maybe an offset on the z-axis, just as examples of just to show you how you use it. So I'll show you two ways of using that. So let's wire another transform node here, and I'm going to export a couple of parameters that I want to control using marker data. So I will export fixed translation Z, so I can move it up and down, and also rotation Z, so I can rotate it this way too. So I'm going to have those two things. So I'm going to show you two ways to do this. One requires no use of expressions at all, uses a macro, which we've already included that in, so you don't need to do it. So say for example we want to use the first data channel there to control the translation of these. You can do that by going to macros, going to logic, array attributes, and in here there's a macro called X-spline variables. Now what this actually does, this X-spline variables macro, is it gives you access in the graph to a lot of the attributes that I said are actually only available in expressions. Now, I'm aware that people don't really like using expressions, or some people aren't keen on them. So what we've done with this macro here is just to allow you to export them, just so you can use them anywhere in the graph without having to get your hands dirty with the actual code. And down at the bottom here, you'll see there is a marker data option. Okay, so there's 9 data channels, and they start at 0. Okay, so this will be the first one if I turn that on, and I can wire that into the Z fixed translation input. Now what you should see now, if I go back to the spline and pick a marker, is using data channel 1 I can move the candy cane up and down using that data channel. If I switch to the third one, I can do the same thing. Okay, like so. So that is how you can do that fairly easily without having to touch an expression. Now, if you do want to use an expression, because this is a longer piece of code, and if you've got a massive style and you're going for maximum efficiency, you maybe don't want to have to pass all of that. So what you can do instead is add an arithmetic node, wire that, and I'm going to use this one for the rotation. So wire that to the rotation input and go to expression again. And this time, again, we want to output something, so we're going to type return. Now this time on the left-hand side, we can look down and see if there's something here that looks like marker data. And there is, in fact, it's right here, X marker data. Now if we look at the description down here, which gives you a little hint on how this thing works, it tells you here that in square brackets afterwards, you put the index of the data channel. Okay, so in this case, we want the second data channel. Remember, it's 0 index, so we would use 1 here and close the brackets, and then use a semicolon to close the line and hit evaluate. Okay, so they're basically two ways of accessing the same data, one using a macro, one using an expression. But now again, if I come down here and come into the second data channel, which is this one here, I should be able to change the rotation, here we go, by using that second data channel. Okay. And then finally, the other thing you might want to do is change the length of the candy canes. Now for this one you have to use expressions because it's in a nested generator. So the marker data exists in this generator here, which I'm going to call generator 1. Generator 1. That's where the marker, because that's where the spline is plugged in, see? So the marker data exists here, but we want to access it from here. So what we can do is to use an expression and dot syntax to get to that. So again, I'll export parameters and I'll export the X size parameter, and I'm going to add an arithmetic node and wire it to the X size. Change it to expression. Now we do exactly the same thing, but this time we just need to, instead of using X marker data from here, we need to scroll down until you find the generator name that's at the end of the chain, which is generator 1, and then pick X marker data from there. And you'll see it will say gen1.x marker data. Then we can choose the index we want, which I think is 2 in this case, and put a semicolon. And hit evaluate. Now nothing's going to happen because they don't have any value currently. So if we come back to our spline and choose, give it a bit of a size here, you can see that I can start to set the size of these nested generators as well as the other parameters. So that's pretty much 3 ways of accessing marker data. One using a macro, one using an expression, and one using an expression in a nested graph. So they're the 3 primary ways you're probably going to want to access that data. Another question we get asked is how do you change the types of values here? So these are all kind of just generic units at the moment, and obviously I can type in the names of these here, but a better way of doing that is to define those in the graph themselves. So what you can do when you come back to the graph is go up to base objects, customize rail clone spline here, and we can create a set. So you can see I've already done this actually. So you can call number 1, actually this is offset, I think, but done them in a different order in this demo, offset, and then for this we would want it to be units, and then this one was rotation, and we would want that to be float, and this one is length, and that's set to units again. And you just click OK, and you think, well, what, that's helpful, but where's that gone? So what happens is if you click on the spline, go to the spline object, if you scroll down to data set here, you can see there's the set that I created, and if I click on that, it updates the names but also the unit types here. So this one is units, for example, and so is this one, and this one is a float value. So you can therefore easily update the types and names of your data channels there. So I hope that's that quick introduction to kind of marker data helps. It's really not a lot more complicated than that. Of course, you can use it in lots of different ways, and with nested graphs it becomes incredibly powerful. But they are the 3 primary ways of accessing that data. Great. Have we got any questions there, Jaime?
You're doing it so well, there's no questions at all. So,
well,
Rokas is saying, Rokas says hi.
Oh, hello, Rokas. Good to see you.
Yeah, glad to hear from him.
Yeah, excellent. Great. So where are we? Marker. Okay, moving on with the Christmas theme. How do you make Christmas tinsel or garlands using Forest Pack? You could use Forest Pack or Railclone with this one, but I've got some Railclone stuff going on already, so I chose to demo this one with Forest Pack instead. So let's have a quick look at this scene. So in this one I'm going to nest Forest Pack objects together and just show you how you might be able to do that, which is an unusual use in this case, but it's the same techniques we use for creating patches of grass and scattering those for large areas and things like that. Just give me a moment to load the scene. Okay, so here's what I'm starting with. So I've got basically for the tinsel, I've got 3 strips of kind of metal ribbon, I guess. And for the garland, I've got this object here, which actually is a group which is already a nested Forest Pack object. So this is a single spline, which has this little leaf thing down here scattered along it. There's really not much more to it than that, and I'll show you basically how I do that with the tinsel anyway, but this one's been pre-done. So I will close that group again, but that's what that is. Okay, so let's select our three little bits of tinsel here. I'm going to come up and create a Forest Pack object. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cough. I'm going to draw an icon here because I'm going to use path distribution mode. Actually, I forgot to click on populate from selection first, so you can do this. Normally this is a quicker way of doing it. Click on the 3 objects, click on Forest Pack, make sure populate from selection is already highlighted, draw an object. Now that will automatically populate the geometry list with those objects in theory. My streaming software does slow down my Mac's interface, so apologies for that. So there we go. There I've got the 3 objects in the geometry list. So in the areas rollout, well, we don't need anything there. So what we want is to go to distribution and switch the mode to path. And I'm going to add a small circular path here. And you can see I'm scattering a piece of tinsel along that path. I'm going to make the spacing much smaller. So much smaller than that even. Really ton of tinsel in there. Something like that. And I'm going to come down now to the transform rollout and add some randomization here. So what I want to do really is splay this out like something like this to give myself a little kind of piece of tinsel, like so. Something like that's good. I'm also going to add a bit of scale randomization, why not? And yeah, and that's pretty much that. To be honest, that sort of pretty much takes care of that. Now, because I'm going to nest this inside another Forest Pack object, I'm just going to play it safe and go into the display mode, and I'm going to make sure that the mode is set to meshes, not on automatic. Now that will sort of collapse it to an editable poly on the fly, rather than try and calculate it as instances. Only in this object, in the end object, it will be instanced again. I'm also setting the viewport mode to mesh. I'm forcing that so that Forest Pack can sample it correctly. So then we can create another Forest Pack object from this one. So I'm going to select Forest Pack here. Doesn't work, the populate from selection doesn't work when you're nesting Forest Pack objects, so you might as well just turn that off. But I'm going to do the same thing basically, add a Forest Pack object. Just coming over to the geometry rollout this time and add that Forest Pack object I just created. So that's in there now. And then we're going to come back to the distribution rollout and change to path. Pick one of these spiral paths from the scene and change the spacing. That much, something like so. Okay, a few things here then. It's fine, the distribution is fine. I just need to rotate it a little bit, so I'm just going to turn this on, and maybe I'll change the spacing a bit so I can see what's going on a bit better. So we need to rotate these so that they're sort of flat, right? So let's see which one of these that might be. Change that 90. Yeah, that's the one. So it's the y-axis. Changing that 90 degrees. There I might go sort of a bit more variation, so 85 to 95, just a bit more variety, and the others are fine. I'd also turn on scale randomization, and that's pretty much it. And once you've done that, you can close up the gaps. And there you've got some kind of tinsel. And that's pretty much how it works. Two forest pack objects, one nested inside the other. So the nice thing about that is because they're both parametric, you can come back to this one and you can change the number of threads and the size and that kind of thing pretty easily. Now the garland is exactly the same. It just is done using this third nested forest pack object instead, and the spline in the middle there has been made renderable as well and put into a group. So this does illustrate that forest pack is able to distribute groups again. So what I'm going to do is to take this little patch that I made earlier, and I'm going to clone it. When 3ds Max catches up with me, just going to clone it. And then I'll pick this other little circle here. So we'll delete the existing one. Something sure is playing havoc with the speed of my computer today. I am sorry for this. There we go. So we've got that on there. So all I need to do now is to go into the geometry rollout and delete these three objects here and pick this instead. So if I click on plus, I can't really pick it directly from the scene, because what will happen is I'll just pick one part of that group. I'll either pick the spline in the middle or the forest object. So when you want to pick a group, you just press H on the keyboard and then you can select them from the pick object list. There's the group there. And there's my little patch, garland patch. And I think I changed the transforms a little bit this time to make it a bit more like a tree. So I think I aimed them kind of up a little bit more like that. And then we can use that by cloning the existing one here, and basically following that same procedure, using that as an input. Okay. Probably because I've got everything set to mesh, it's behaving a bit slowly as well. Wouldn't normally do that. It's just because of the demo. Okay, here we go. Got it. Okay. So, swapping the source for this one. That's fine. And then I'm going to change the spline. And that's it, really. That's all there is to it. And I've got these kind of intertwining splines, so I would just change those. So we end up with this kind of effect. Okay, and I won't render it now, it's being slow enough as it is, but this was the kind of effect where you've got these two types of kind of Christmas garland both operating together. Okay, but you can see both just completely in Forest Pack. Could have done it in Railclone too, but Forest Pack made some sort of sense this time. It's nice to see that you can do things with similar things with both plugins, so you've got the choice depending on what you're most comfortable with. Lovely. Any questions?
Nope, it's quiet today.
Quiet today. It's nearly Christmas, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep. We got 25 minutes to go. Sorry to be.
And now I'm wondering what to skip. Okay, I'll be very quick on this one because this was a specific request for this week, requested before. So, how to parameterize and randomize the zigzag modular desks in Railclone. This was from Amit, who I think is here. So I'm just going to load this scene up. So kind enough to send me this scene, and I've tried to put this together exactly as it was sent to me rather than modifying the geometry too much. The only thing I have done is attached together various parts of the configuration. That's the wrong one. But apart from that, I'm going to try and do the rest of it in in rail clone, sorry. And really this is just an exercise in using the compose operator to create little groups here. And I may not see that this is a little bit fiddly, so it could take me a little while just playing with parameters. So what I'll do is probably just give you the general principle, and then we can look at that maybe another time. So let's see, desktop. Right. So what I've got here is what I've got here are the different parts. So these were together when I got them, and I've just split them out into what looks like tileable pieces, right? So this could be a start, and this could be an end, and this could be a mid piece here. And you can see that they kind of fit together like this, and repeat. Now, the only catch is, as they were sent to me, is that ideally, in order to tile, this corner, for example, and this corner should line up. But if you like a line to the bottom of the screen, they don't quite. So you would normally want to rotate it a little bit so that these form a straight line between the corners, and that will normally make things a little bit easier in Railclone. But I've chosen just to leave as it is for now, rather than play with the source and see if we can't fix it in Railclone directly. I've done a little bit of the work already as well, just to save you watching me add segments. So in Railclone here, I've added just the desk parts already into this Railclone style, and I've added a transform node here and turned off bend and slice here. So what I'm going to try and do now is just get this tiling to work first of all. So obviously there are gaps where the bounding box ends, butting up against one another. So I think most people probably know now that you fix that with padding. So what I'm going to do is try and close up the padding. But you can see, because like I say, because the rotation isn't quite right for them to overlap like that, it'll overlap okay at the end, I have to kind of fix it. So what I'm going to do is come into the transforms and try and fix it here by fiddling with the rotation, Z rotation, in conjunction with the left padding, until I can get these to snap together a little bit more accurately. So something like that is probably okay for the minute. So you can see the default segments, which is these, are okay now. Now that has messed up the start. So what I'll do in the start is the same rotation probably. So let's just copy that. And then what I might need to do is just shuffle it around a little bit. There we go, just by moving it on the X and Y axis. So that fixes the start, and the end the same. Just want to fix the rotation, and then the no, not that one. The Y axis is the one we're looking for now. This is dependent on the length as well. So I want to get the length about there. You're always going to set, with a desk like this, you're going to kind of set the length to the amount of pieces that you need. So it's important that's right too. So let's pop that up there. That seems about right. Okay, so that kind of gives you the desk layout, and you can adjust the length now, and that works pretty well. You just need to tweak the size to fit that in there. You could set it to adaptive, but it depends how much you mind if the desks are deformed beyond the original kind of manufacturer size. So I'm assuming in most cases that's not desirable, so I've left it alone. Okay, so that kind of gives you that. But what you want to do is obviously be able to add all these props and things on there in such a way that they can be slightly randomized each time. And in order to do that, what I've done is I've just made, in this particular case, just to save a bit of time, and I'll show you another way of doing it in a minute, is I've just put the pivots in the same place as the desk segment. So you can see the pivot point is the same in all of them. And that means that I can use group mode to very easily snap this stuff back together inside RailClone. So I'll just add a segment node here, and I'm going to just pick this chair, for example, down here, and wire it into a new compose operator. Now, initially when I do that, you can see it's going to be, well, it's going to kind of all go really wrong. But what I want to do is change the compose node from sequential to grouped. Right, and so when it's in grouped mode, it basically aligns the pivot points all together and just builds the mesh back out from there. So you can see now I've got my chairs there. That's perfect. But we of course want to like maybe move them around a little bit. So we can come into translation and I can kind of randomly shuffle them around a little bit so that it's a little bit more varied. Like so. So now you've done that, you can start adding the other bits and bobs. So we can add the other side, for example. I'll just do this section rather than all of them. So we can add the other side. We can add the computers. Just by duplicating these nodes, which are randomized slightly. Okay, so you can see it keeps re-randomizing. And that's fine. This is just a case of closing the gaps up. It's no big deal. So that's pretty much sort of how you do it, really. Just through building up through compose nodes, like that, having all the pivots aligned in the first place. And the other way you can do it, if you haven't got the pivots aligned, like for example this printer or this pot of plants, see the pivots for those are still on the ground, but they're aligned directly underneath. Which makes randomizing the rotation better because they're rotating from directly in the center of the object rather than the center of the table. But it does mean you have to move it in position in the RailClone. So if I was to do the printer, pick that, and wire that to there, you can see it sort of popped up in the middle here. So I'd have to move it using the translation controls to put it kind of wherever I wanted to put it. That's okay, that's just because I went a bit too far. Okay, so that's kind of basically how that would work, and then when you've got it there, you can kind of rotate that as much as you want, because it's going to rotate in the center point of the printer instead of the center point of the desk, which is better probably. Just takes a bit more setting up. See, each one of those is, it's a very scruffy office. Each one of those is very badly placed. Okay, so that's the basic principle that I wanted to talk about. I don't want to. I could spend more time piecing this all together, but I'm aware of the kind of time restraints on us today. So perhaps if we need more, let me know. We can. Maybe this is worth a separate tutorial. This kind of assembly thing. Let me know what you think. Great. Let me see what's next. This was kind of interesting, not a winter one again, and an interesting one recently, which was how to create a kind of crop harvesting effect using Forest Pack. There was an animation of a this is obviously not a render, animation of a harvester going across a field, and they wanted to have it cut after the harvester and fully grown before, and also to bend the wheat slightly as it got towards the front of the harvester. Obviously, what you can't do with Forest Pack is have a full simulation of the plants being cut. But if it's just a distant shot, you can do this quite easily with I said RailClone, I meant Forest Pack, but Forest Pack. So let me show you this. Are there any questions in the meantime? Make a tutorial on it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are going to be running our survey starting on 2023. So you guys will have a chance to ask for new features and new things to be covered in tutorials.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, it's a case of just playing with that. With that one, it is just playing with those compose nodes, but it is a lot of sort of if you're adding all the pieces one at a time, It's not hard, but it's time consuming for demoing in a quick thing like this where I can't edit, or cut bits and pieces out. So so it's perhaps best, go into it again. I think people will benefit. Okay, so here we are. So obviously I have a simplified scene here, which has normal crops here, and this, let me see, actually let me show you the setup first of all. Just hide selection. Right, okay, so this is what we've got. So this box is our combine harvester, if you can imagine that. This is where the harvester has been, so we've just put a strip out the back. We've got an area in front of the combine harvester. This is where the blades would be kind of cutting it. And I've got some lines here as well that indicate the direction the harvester is going, and that would hopefully, or we can perhaps use those to bend the plants in that direction. This is animated, of course, moving across the scene. So first things first, let's look at how to just cut the plants. So we'll just unhide all. Here we go. Come into the forest object. So in the areas rollout, that's where we're going to do most of this work. In the areas rollout, I've got the surface area turned on, and what I've got activated is this select models option here. If I turn that off, you can see I've got a combination of the cut pieces of wheat and the full length ones. But if I turn it on and click pick, you can choose just which models to display on this particular area, and I'm choosing A here, which are the full length ones. So what I'll then do is to add a spline area to this, and pick the trail behind the combine harvester from this scene and set it to exclude. So I've removed the long wheat from that area, okay, and because the spline's animated, it's moving as well. And now what I want to do is to add back the cut ones. So what we can do now is to add another spline area, pick the same spline from the scene, and this time go into select models, pick the second, the cut wheat, and click OK. So now you can see behind the box I've got cut wheat, and in front I've got full length wheat. Now I'm actually going to that, so that pretty much takes care of that part. In order to bend the piece at the front, I'm actually going to have to create that in a separate forest pack object, because if I start bending this bit here, it will bend all around the sides and everywhere else. So what I'm going to do is to also remove the wheat from that little box in front there. So I'm just going to click another area and exclude it. Okay, so I've cleared the part in front as well. And then, using another forest object, which I've already got conveniently created over here, I'm going to pick the same surface, and I'm just going to use this little area in front, this rectangle in front, as an include area. So I'll just add that as an include area. That's the wrong spline. Okay, it's an include area. It looks more dense just because the adaptive thingy isn't kicking in here, but it would be the same. So you can see now that is included there. So, but it's not bending. And in order to do that, we need to turn to good old forest effects. So we included in Forest Pack 8, there was a couple of new forest effects. One of them allows you to bend objects in the direction of a spline. So I can add a new effect. I can find this one in the effects browser. I'm pretty sure it's down here in transform, and it's called lean in spline direction. Lean in spline direction. So you click load, and then it's just got a couple of settings. So first of all, I need to pick the spline that I want to use, and remember I've got those 3 splines at the front here, so I'll click those. It's got distance, so I can increase that. And then it's got the angle I want to lean, so you can see I can lean those over like that. Something like that. So you can see now with those done, you're kind of bending the wheat over. This is obviously a mock-up, but you're bending the wheat over in front of the box. it's then being cut underneath the box and it's turning into stubble at the back there. So this gives you, you know, from a distance, a pretty passable and quick, that's the important thing, quick and easy to set up, an efficient way of creating that effect. Great. Any questions about that? Nope.
Nope.
It's very quiet out there today.
Quiet. Yeah, it's very quiet today.
Okay. So when we, for the kind of image that we used to promote this live stream, we used the Forest Pack 8 image and then just quickly, very quickly actually, in about 30-40 minutes, converted it to a snowy scene. And just a couple of tips on how that was done, really. So I'm not going to handle the scene itself, but just how we converted the trees to snowy trees and how quickly to change the materials. So let me just bring this in. Okay. This is again, this is, some of you will have seen this technique, but there have been a few changes since this tutorial was originally released. But how to use Forest Pack to put snow on objects. It's a weird use for Forest Pack, but it bears repeating, I think, especially because we now have Frost for free. You can download ThinkBox Frost for nothing, which is incredibly powerful. But you can also download Tyflow free, the demo version, which also has a meshing plugin in it, which even in the non-multi-threaded version is still much faster, or in my experience it seems to be much faster than blob mesh. So this technique comes back and can be quite quick and easy to do. So let me show you what I'm on about. So first of all, I've got a tree that could be used in the scene, and this is a V-Ray proxy at the moment, but I want to bring in the full mesh. So somewhere in here it should say import as mesh. There it is. So there's our mesh. Good. So that brings the tree in that we can now use. There is, this is not an evergreen tree, so first thing we need to do is remove the leaves. So let's change this to an editable poly and just find these leaves and remove them. Could do this procedurally actually, but let's do it this way. So this ID 3, let's select them all and then hit delete, and I think there are some little stems there which are on ID 2, so we'll have those off and delete those too. Now here's the weird bit. Let's come to the top view, and we want to create a little square, a plane that's small enough that you can get it on top of these branches. So we want to create a plane here that's with no length and width segments. That is something like this, quite tiny, could even be smaller. The smaller it is, the more detail you'll get. So something like that. Okay. And then, with that selected, I'm going to create a Forest Pack object. I set it generate mode this time, populate from selection, because I've got the plane selected, and just click on the tree. And hit, I'm going to say no in that case. Okay. Coming across to, man, I forgot to switch. Sorry about that, folks. All I've done is imported a tree and deleted the leaves from it. Sorry about that. Okay. So here's a tree, here's no leaves, and I've created in the top view, let me just show you, in the top view somewhere there, I've created a very, very small plane here, which is just big enough, and it could be smaller, just to cover the tops of the branches when I scatter it. Okay, so the idea is this plane will be scattered on top of this tree. That is the idea. So, as you can see, I've got the tree added to the surfaces rollout, and what I'm going to do now is come into the distribution rollout. I'm going to set the the image to full, and I'm just going to shrink this way, way down. And you can see, actually, if I just hide the tree for a minute, you can start to see the pattern of the tree start to emerge. So what I'm going to do is go into the display rollout and change this to mesh so we can actually see the full shape. And what we want to do is to get this so that basically it becomes the grid. We close up the gaps in the grid. So if I change it to, first of all, I'm going to turn off the maximum number of items, so it's not hiding any in the viewports, and that's going to give me full density. And then I can sort of tweak this grid a little bit to close it up a bit more. So I'm just trying to close up the gaps in this grid. Something like that. And what you'll, oops, still going. Okay, so what you're going to get is a kind of, this is just forest pack now. So you can see this is just all the planes scattered on top of the tree. And that's probably all we need. So what we can do to make that into snow is, I'm going to say, you could use frost. I haven't got it installed here at the moment, but I have got TieFlow. So I can go to TieFlow and TieMesher. This is the free version, again, I should point out. And it's in blob mesh mode, and what I want to do is just use it to pick the forest object, and then I can get some snow on my trees. Something like this. Let's make it white. Go, and then of course you can change the size if you want to. You can be sort of saw if you've tried this with blob mesh, that was considerably faster than blob mesh was, and this is still a single threaded, as far as I know. In the demo, it's a single threaded version of the mesher. So that is a very quick way of adding some actual volumetric sort of snow to the top of the trees. Now it's less obvious in this mode as well, but it's actually occluding from the top too, so it's not going to scatter if the branches are occluded by the branches or the tree above. Okay, so it's as though the snow has actually fallen. It's not going to get, if there's something over the top of it, you wouldn't get snow underneath it. So that's a nice quick way of doing that too. So that was very quickly, that was how I added some snow to my trees. I just, for me, because I'm not a particle whiz kid, for me that's and I know forest pack pretty well, that's a very quick and easy way of adding some snow using the tools that I'm already familiar with. The other thing that I did, which you can do, it's an old technique, but it's quite good when you haven't got objects that are in the foreground and you don't actually need snow with volume on them. You just want to put the polygons that face upwards, you just want to make them white basically, or put a snow texture on there. So what you can do there is just do it all using a shader, and basically in that whole scene, the terrain, all the castles and everything were made snowy using this little tip. So basically this is a material effect, which I'll show you from scratch. So you basically pick the material, which is there. Just wait for it to catch up. There we go. And then, so I'm going to use a blend material. Now, I think in Corona you have to do it for each individual material in a sub-object material. In V-Ray, I think, someone can correct me on that, in V-Ray you can wire the multi-sub-object material into a blend material, which is convenient. So I'll do that and then wire that back to the tree. Now what I can do in coat 1 is add my snow material, which I would normally create a nicer snow material, but for reasons of keeping things nice and fast, I'll just use a white V-Ray material. And then the trick is to use a fall off material in the blend one. So you would just go to general and fall off. And let's just come up here so you can see this is what this is doing a little bit in the preview. So in default mode, fall off is viewing direction towards away. So we want to change it to world Z axis. So that's top to bottom. And then we want to change it to towards away. And actually the snow's on the bottom rather than the top, so we'll switch those colours around. Okay, so that's already putting snow on the top of any object automatically in the scene that you apply that to. So that is very straightforward. What you might want to do is to change the mix curve here a little bit to give it a harder cut off, because it's a very gradual fall off at the moment, from sort of starting at the 90-degree point all the way around to facing away. So what you can do is add a couple of points here and just reduce that range a little bit, and then you can see you get a harder fall off, something like that. You can move that up and down and get different effects. And that's kind of all there is to it. That will automatically add snow. And I think if I render this now, this risk a render, oops, you should get snow on that tree using that approach. So you can see snow on it's hitting all the parts of the tree which are facing upwards. So of course, unlike the forest pack technique where there's occlusion going on from the sky, with this technique, it's just the branches that are facing upwards. But again, in most cases, that works pretty well. It's pretty straightforward. Good.
Well, regarding the previous feature,
yes,
I mean, just asking if he has a city, can he add forest pack to the surface?
Yeah, you might struggle with the city. I mean, you could do it with individual. If you've got instanced objects, you could obviously do it with individual assets, and then it would instance them around. It just depends on the detail level that you need. I've never tried it with the city, but you can see how small the piece was that I needed to get nice, quite nice sort of detailed snow on a tree. It was minute, and that scattered on a city would be millions and millions of tiny little things. So you might struggle a little bit. If you can get away with doing it with big planes, maybe. It would depend on how the scene's all put together. I think of it as something more I'd do on individual assets that I'm already scattering around or doing that kind of thing with. And for things that, again, you might not need it. That what I'm saying, I think you might, for things that are in the distance, you probably don't need actual snow. You can probably get away with this texturing technique or something similar anyway, because you're not going to actually see that thickness. So I think it's a case of trying to do the most of only adding the detail just where it's needed. Yeah. Great. How am I for time?
We are over the hour, so
okay.
It's time to wrap up.
One last thing then. Okay.
Yeah.
Since it's Christmas, this was a question that was asked on the forum a couple of weeks ago, I think, and it wasn't about presents, obviously, but it was a question where a user had been sent a big sort of scene which had tons of curtains instanced in the buildings, but the original person who created it either didn't have Forest Pack or had instantiated it, so all the curtains in the scene were all individual instances still. And what they wanted to know was, can I convert those instances back to a Forest Pack object so it's more efficient and you can, play with all the various controls that Forest Packs got. And there isn't a built-in feature in Forest Pack that can scan through a scene and convert it to instances. But I mean, quite a while ago now, we did put a script on the forum that can help with these kinds of setups. I know people have used it quite successfully in the past and converted scenes coming from Maya and stuff like that. If you're looking for it, you need to be a registered pro user. It's in the Forest Pack section in scripts for Forest Pack, and if you scroll down, I think it's called instances to Forest. So there's a script there that you can download if you're logged in. I'm not logged in here, so and it's pretty simple. It's got one button. So what I'm gonna just illustrate how that works basically with the scene with some presents in it. So I'll just pop that open. There we go. So I'm just opening this up. Here we go. Okay. So I've got a pile of presents, but as you can see, these are all instanced editable meshes, which is not perhaps the most efficient way of doing things. I've kept it simple in this case, but there could be thousands of these, it's just a little pile of like a couple of hundred presents. So what you're going to need is to isolate or have in the scene somewhere at least one of the instances there. So there are 6 types of parcel in this pile, and I've just instanced a couple out so I can easily find them over here. Okay, you don't necessarily have to do that, but it just made it easier for me to illustrate how that works. And what I'm going to do then is I'll select these again like this. So these need to be added, one of each instance, to the rail clone list and the forest pack geometry list. And basically what will happen when I run the script is it will look at the geometry list and it will try and find all the objects in the scene that are instances of those objects in the geometry list, and then it will add them as forest pack instances instead. So you create a new forest pack object in icon mode, and I'm going to populate from selection. So I've got these objects selected already, just to save adding them all manually myself. Just right click and come over to the modify panel. So there's just a couple of things you have to set up in order for this to work correctly. So first of all, distribution mode is irrelevant. What we need is for it to be in items editor mode. Okay, so in order to add and remove things in forest pack one at a time, you need to be in custom edit mode. So we'll change that to there. Now, as I mentioned, in the geometry list, you've also got the 6 presents which are instanced in here somewhere. And then I'm going to set the display mode to points cloud for now, and that's all you need to do really. So then you need to run that script. Okay, so with the forest pack object selected, run that script. I've got it saved in here somewhere, so I'll just find that object instance. So this is all it is, instances to forest. So if I click this button, it should just run through that, and there you go. It's converted all of those parcels there to a forest pack object. It hasn't deleted the originals. You still have to do that manually, but that has done that for you. So just make sure you don't delete these these ones down here, because these are the ones that forest pack is using obviously to scatter around. So yeah, I think that's probably helpful for people that end up with objects with loads of instances, and it's just hidden basically on the forum. So if you weren't aware of it, I hope that can be helpful for some scenarios we come up with. I mean, I actually find it quite helpful, even things like this where I've run a simulation basically to drop these down, and now I want to convert it to forest pack just to make it a bit more efficient. So you can do it with stuff like that as well. Good. I hope that helps. And I think that is all the time we have. So
yes,
I would
indeed.
just like to say thank you for watching this year. This is our 10th live stream this year, so it was a new thing for us this year, and I hope they've been helpful and enjoyable. And if you've got any suggestions for how you'd like to see them improved, or if you'd like to see other things included, we've talked about doing interviews before and getting guests in instead of you having to listen to me every time, and that sort of thing, then just let us know. Be interested to hear your feedback.
I think we can be pretty satisfied with what we had so far this year, and a nice average views after a few weeks gone each month, around 3,000, 4,000. So that's pretty cool. If I would have to ask for something on my wish list, would be people getting more involved the weeks of previous to each Q&A regarding asking for features and questions. Well, we can work that out. And yeah, I'm on with you with bringing new people and bringing people outside of the company for chat and interviews and that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
excellent. Yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah,
sorry. Most of our questions are sourced from the support cases we get, so that tends to be where they come from. So if you've got specific questions that aren't necessarily support, you're just curious, then just let us know on any of our channels. At all, and we'll be sure for sure we'd like to tackle it. Sorry, Jaime, I talked over you there.
Yeah. So nothing else?
No.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
See you in 2023.
Exactly. Keep on rendering.
Excellent. Yes. Great. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
And we are